Oh, grace and peace, family. Grace and peace. Good day and gratitude. Now, that's what I love to say. Good day and gratitude. No matter what time of the day it is, it's always good day. Yeah, I was thinking about Sister Vicky, grace and peace. I think she be saying grace and peace, but I love good day and gratitude. Good day to you and gratitude to the ancestors. Always gratitude to our ancestors. We must always give gratitude to our ancestors, regardless what's going on, regardless who's around, regardless how we feel. Thank our ancestors. I don't know if y'all noticed that fog that was outside. It was really bad yesterday. And I wonder if that's got, I know I do be getting a little, hype and stuff, but I can stand a little hypeness now. But I wonder if that's got anything to do with my hoarseness, breathing in that fog yesterday. I've been seeing a lot about it online also. But it's dissipated here. I haven't been out today. I didn't think that's what it was though. I can't really tell down here downtown anyway. But it was really bad yesterday and stuff, and I was just wondering, is anybody else throat scratchy? I probably should be drinking some tea. Well, cinnamon tea is good for the sore throat, but it's more like a scratchiness. Spirit come through. However, good day and gratitude, family. This is Face the Nation with Bolden Unchained, and we're back again with the final reading of Racial Violence in Kentucky, 1865 to 1940. Of course, I'm deciding if I want to start this chapter over again because there's some fairly long chapters. And by us starting so late at night, midnight with the ancestors. But I'll try to find a place here so we can, continue forward and finish this book. But it's been a lesson worthy of our attention. And I want to thank everyone, even if you just dropped by. Thank you anyway. And the ancestors, it pleases the ancestors when we talk about them, when we remember them, when we thank them, especially when we teach us and our young ones about them. Our ancestors love that. It breaks their heart that we don't remember them, other than our significant grandmother, great grandmother, big mama, and great auntie, and then somewhere along the lines we just tend to forget, especially if their passing had to do with the traumatic events that we are learning about, especially if their passing had to do with any of the racial, agendas, whether it's malpractice, lynching, wrongful conviction, but whatever it is and stuff, we must remember. I mean, we as a people cannot go forward. And I would like to get the disclaimers out the way, and then we can begin our lesson for tonight. All right, good day and gratitude. Welcome to Bolden Unchained, a channel dedicated to Black media and Black America and uncovering and confronting the many agendas, events, acts, good day. Okay. We're Bolden Unchained, and we are here to assist Black America and Black media in the uncovering and the facing, the confronting, the many agendas, projects, the many laws and acts and bills, and the many events the many compromises. I didn't know it was so many compromises. The many compromises and sabotages against Black America. Bolden Unchained is here to assist Black America and Black media in the uncovering of the many agendas, events, acts, laws, compromises, projects, what studies, experiments, like the Loud Station experiment. I forgot what year it was, but I think that was in Indiana, and it was many, many decades ago. And the government went into the small Black community and told the parents of some 5-year-old students, they were just in like kindergarten, preschool. And they went into those communities and told those parents that their babies had ringworms. I think it was ringworms or something like that, and that they needed to treat them. And the parents, they said, okay, they wanted their babies to be treated. And honey, they was radiating them babies. They was radiating those babies to see what the reaction would be, what the lifespan would be, and what the toleration of the pain, the radiation was, I guess. But it's called Loud Station, Lyles. And Verdius Hardiman, Hole in His Head. Y'all remember that song, Hole in Your Head? We need something like we need a hole in our head or something like that. I think I was like 10 or 11 when that song came out. I vaguely remember it, but I know somebody remember that song, that phrase, hole in your head. And it ain't that V8 song. I need a V8 like I need a oops upside the head or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, Verdius Hardiman, Vertius Hardiman, I believe. Verdius Hardiman. He was one of those children. He was one of those little boys. And he lived his whole life wearing a hat. He wore a hat on his head his whole life. Nobody ever saw it till he got to be an elderly man. And I guess he couldn't keep the secret any longer. Maybe his closest family knew, because when you at home and stuff and you want to be your most comfortable, and then your family know what you've been through. But he pulled his hat off, and y'all, the radiation melted all of his scalp. You could literally set your hand off in his head. A baby's hand, a small hand, a young toddler's hand, maybe a 9-10-year-old's hand. You could even ball up a small hand. That's how much of his skull was ate out from that radiation. We're going to have to watch it sometimes. That's Loud Station. I don't know if there's a book on that story or not, but I have some notes somewhere on it. I just never forgot his name. And that it was in Indiana. I just never forgot it. But it's some really cruel agendas and activities, that's been perpetrated and targeted, at the Black community. And I can't even imagine. And all we have to do is remember what happened so it don't happen again. And it already just give me chills. He lived. Verdius lived. He lived a life. Yeah, he was a elderly man when he shared his story with the world. Perhaps he wanted it to be known before he did die, so that it won't happen again. But while he was living, and he was still young, because he was just a baby when it happened, but throughout his life and stuff, He didn't tell the public, he didn't tell society about what happened to him. He probably had a lot of reasons why. Fear being number one. Fear probably was number one. Hold on, I'm going to grab me some cinnamon. Just to put it in this water. Prosperity. Thank you. Prosperity to you. I didn't have any cinnamon. Well, I'll just put this off in there. It's a lemon ginger. Honey lemon is good for the common cold. But this right here is lemon ginger. So it'll at least give it some flavor. Right? Oh, you know what? I think I do got some cinnamon sticks. I'll go check them soon. Oh, however, let's get back to this here. Bolden Unchained is here to assist Black America and Black media in the uncovering and the facing, the critiquing, the discussing of the many agendas, events, projects, laws, acts, bills, compromises, and sabotages against Black America. Black America against Black America within history through the spiritually exceptional lenses of resilience, loyalty to us, and education. Because we will be looking at the trauma of Black America through the lens of resilience, because they never gave up. Although it may seem like it. It may seem like they didn't have hope, and a lot of the trials and the obstacles and the losses and the unimaginable things that happened. Anyone would lose hope, because Jesus didn't come for a lot of our ancestors who were victims. And so we're looking at this through the spiritual lenses of resilience, loyalty, because our people were loyal to us. They were faithful to us. Black America was faithful to us. I don't care what nobody say. Yeah, we had sellouts. But us as a people, once we knew they were selling out, we should have cast them out, because they can't speak for us. And that's what we must do today, as far as that skin. And we are looking at this through a spiritually exceptional lens of education. Because, see, we unlearning all that bullshit. Parochial schools, Western society, this fake education system will not be able to tell our children, to teach our children, indoctrinate our children, prosperity, that Christopher Columbus is a hero. Not no more. Not anymore. Black America, you and I will not allow white America, the schools, the preachers, the teachers, the mentors, the coaches, none of them. We won't allow any of them to teach our children that Christopher Columbus was a hero. No, we would teach our children that people was already here. Christopher didn't discover nothing. He destroyed. what he found. I think I was looking through the books and I didn't see his book on the 4 voyages, but I let one of my neighbors borrow it. But hey, we can always go to the library. We can always Google it, chapter by chapter if we must. And this channel is for a disclaimer. This channel is for educational and informal purposes. Content may include sensitive and or graphic topics related to slavery and oppression. Viewer discretion is advised. And you know I like to read the other copyright disclaimer too. Copyright Disclaimer Act 107 of the Copyright Act 1976 allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Yeah, I got a little closer where I can get to it. All right, so let's see where we're going to begin here in chapter 8. Because it's at least, the chapter is at least maybe 20 pages. You know, there's some long chapters, which is okay. That's fine. Because really, you know, we want to take time and we want to read, you know, through this. You know, I think I've started chapter 8 at least twice just to back up. And everything seems to go, you know, with each other to coincide. And it's talking about the cases. Okay, this right here may be a good place. Racial violence in Kentucky, 1865 to 1940. Lynchings, mob rule, and legal lynchings. In the continuation of another trend from the 19th century, hostile whites packed the courtrooms as Afro-Americans were sentenced to death for the murder of white people. Even in cases with circumstantial evidence or facts suggesting that Afro-Americans had acted in self-defense, they stood little chance of winning acquittal from all white juries. On July 26, 1906, Martha Broughton, Broughton, was murdered in Knox County. Suspicion centered on her black domestic servant, Annie Henson, and Henson's male companion, Jesse Fitzgerald. Robbery was thought to be the motive. No solid evidence could be found linking them to the woman's death, but Barberville officials concluded that the black couple had the opportunity, and Fitzgerald had been linked with the deaths of 2 white women in Alabama, though this allegation proved to be false. While in jail awaiting their indictment from the grand jury, the 2 were almost lynched by a mob. After having Henson and Fitzgerald secluded in jail in another community, authorities made plans for the trial. The governor sent 2 companies of state troops and a Gatling gun to ensure that the mob would not interfere with the court proceedings. But as the Courier Journal candidly stated, no effort is expected to be made to lynch the Negroes if speedy trials are given. The paper failed to mention the obvious, that the speedy trials would certainly result in guilty convictions and death sentences. But see, that was one of the conditions of the mob. They agreed to let the law handle the criminals, but it must be quick and efficient. And they wanted the death sentence. They wanted lynching. However, to do an immediate trial and lynching would be death to the accused. You see? The paper failed to mention the obvious that the speedy trials will certainly result in guilty convictions and death sentences. Fitzgerald and Henson were brought back to Barberville on the evening of August the 9th. After being taken off the train, they were handcuffed and placed in the center of the 120 troops and marched to jail. So they had 120 troops around them. So that was 30, 30, 30, 30, all around them, 30 troops, and they was in the middle. A large, angry crowd jeered at them every step of the way and were held back from attacking the Afro-Americans only by the troops' sharp bayonets. As the troops was around Henson and Fitzgerald, 120 troops, and they had their bayonets. I think they were them large rifles with the sharp thing on the end of it. That's the only thing that stopped white people from reaching in there to get them, to grab them. They wanted to get them that bad. And only the troops with their bayonets poking them. Can you imagine the whole trip to that courthouse for them? The growling, the sneering, the yelling. I know they was, I bet they was fainting. A large angry crowd jeered them every step of the way and were held back from attacking the Afro-Americans only by the troops' sharp bayonets. The next morning, the defendants appeared in the packed courtroom. Indeed, at the start of the trial each morning, people rushed madly to secure one of the 600 seats. See, they only had 600 seats for the trial. And the lynchings was thousands of people, sometimes 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. One lynching had 20,000 people. And another one had 1,000, 100,000. Estimated to be 100,000 people from all over every county, every state surrounding that little small town that was doing that lynching. So to have 600 seats, you know they was there at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know they was there at 2 o'clock in the morning. They was all outside on the lawn, down the street. They might have had a huge megaphone because that released a lot of built up rage that need to be satiated, to do that. So the next morning, the defendants appeared in the packed courtroom. Indeed, at the start of the trial each morning, people rushed madly to secure one of the 600 seats. Once these seats were taken, the remaining people were forced to stand outside. Only after Fitzgerald and Henson were seated in court did the judge select two well-known attorneys, F.D. Simpson and J. M. Gilbert, to represent them. Despite being community leaders, both lawyers feared the mob. Now, both lawyers was community leaders. They worked in the community. Yeah, they worked in this community, so they knew these white people that was the angry mob. And they were scared as hell of them. And the people knew them. But they would have killed them. The mob would have got them. So what happened was the attorney stated that they would not have taken the case for any money consideration, but being appointed to defend the prisoners, they would devote every energy to the cases and defend the Negroes as they would anyone else. Yep, so they didn't take no money. They didn't want no money, but they were just doing their job, and they would devote their energy, and their time to their clients. Just like they would anyone else. Both lawyers asked for a delay to have sufficient time to prepare a defense. The judge agreed, saying that the trial would begin 3.5 hours later, after lunch. The attorneys also asked for a change of venue, a request denied by the judge. However, for unexplained reasons, several changes took place right before the start of the trial. The court granted a 2-day delay and decided to try the defendants separately. And in a move that suggested that Fitzgerald and Henson could not receive a fair trial from the citizens of Knox County and Barberville, the court brought in jurors from Whitley County to hear both cases. The state tried Fitzgerald first. A surprise witness against him turned out to be the jailer of Stanford, where Fitzgerald had been taken to avoid the mob. It is interesting how often white jailers testified that blacks had willingly confessed to them, pouring out all the details of their crimes. According to jailer W.J. Herring, Herring, Fitzgerald had gone to the Bolden home to see Henson. While talking with the woman, Fitzgerald had been ordered by Bolden to leave. This made him angry, and he returned later in the night, forced an entry, got into the woman's room where she was asleep, and plunged his knife into her throat. He then stole $36 and fled. Fitzgerald's lawyers, who had already expressed their displeasure at being chosen as his counsel, because they didn't want to be, his counsel. They didn't want to be their counsel. But since they was, so, they was already kind of salty about it. Fitzgerald's lawyers, who had already expressed their displeasure at being chosen as his counsel, made no case for the black man, directing only a few questions to the various witnesses for the state and putting only 2 witnesses for the defense on the stand. After deliberating for less than an hour, the jury handed down the death sentence. The Lexington Reporter was surprised by Fitzgerald's lack of concern about the verdict. He seems indifferent to his fate. He spent today tying small nooses from twine, which the soldiers gave him, and handed them out as souvenirs. He does not seem to realize the enormity of his crime. I think he did. He didn't commit the crime. They were finna commit the crime. Yeah. And the crime he did commit was overshadowed by the crime they was finna commit. Well, we know white people waiting outside to get him. So let's just see what's going to happen to Fitzgerald and Henson. The court started the second trial immediately. Throughout the proceedings, the prosecution failed to produce any evidence showing that Annie Henson had assisted Fitzgerald in the crime. Nevertheless, the county attorney asked for the death penalty. After more than 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Henson guilty, but sentenced her to 15 years in prison instead of to the gallows. Described as a light verdict by the newspaper, the decision almost led to her lynching by the mob. Because, see, the mob wanted 2 lynchings. And if the mob had known that they would have given her life sentence instead of the lynching, they would have rushed that jail and took both of them. Because that's what the mob desired. That's what they themed for. It wasn't just give them the death penalty. That was too light of a punishment for committing a crime when we already read, especially if it was against white women, even allegedly. After more than 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Henson guilty, but sentenced her to 15 years in prison instead of to the gallows. Described as a light verdict by the newspaper, The decision almost led to her lynching by the mob. Although the execution was initially scheduled for exactly 30 days after Fitzgerald's conviction, the death sentence was delayed several times. As far as can be determined, his conviction was not reviewed by the state's highest court. He died on the gallows February 15, 1907. In their attempt to appease the mob, because, they had to keep the mob happy. In their attempt to appease the mob, Lebanon officials conducted a murder trial in May 1911, within a matter of days after the crime had been committed. Police officer John A. Roby ventured into the Black community to end a disturbance around 2 o'clock a.m. on Sunday, May the 8th. Later, his body was found, and the medical report showed that he had been stabbed 19 times. After questioning all of the residents in the neighborhood where Roby died, the police began a search for 2 Black teenagers, Jesse Smith and James Buckner. That same morning, the city council held an emergency meeting and offered a $200 reward for their arrest. By evening, the suspects had been captured, and the police found Roby's .45 Colt on Buckner. So the police rushed the 2 youths to Louisville, Kentucky, where they remained for only a few days. Back in Lebanon, events moved quickly. The county prosecutor and court officials agreed to start the trial on Saturday, May the 13th, only 5 days after the murder of the policeman. They could not have selected a worse day for the trial if they wanted to avoid violence, because people was out from work, and Lebanon would be crowded with Marion County residents that was in town on business. Buckner and Smith were returned as scheduled with the customary group of heavily armed guards protecting them. I don't know if it was 120 like it was with Henson and Fitzgerald, but they had troops protecting them. As had become common whenever a murder or rape trial took place, every seat in the courtroom was taken, and more than 1,000 people, under the watchful eyes of the troops, hovered outside the courthouse. 600 was inside the courthouse, and 1,000 was outside. Expressing sympathy for the white crowd, a reporter explained that the people were threatening, only in that they demanded a life for a life. Before the trial started, the judge, the sheriff, and the county attorney openly expressed their fears of a riot if the jury failed to return verdicts of first-degree murder and death sentences. See, it had to be death sentences. The jury could not find no Black person or persons not guilty and not be sentenced to death. They were taking a chance on giving the death penalty with a life sentence. They were taking a chance because, see, the mob only was out for blood and gore and guts of Black people. That's what satiated their crave. So, the system, the jury, the court system knew that they was taking a chance if they didn't go with first-degree murder and the death penalty. I can only imagine how long it took them to get the mob, the racist mob, violent residents of Kentucky to stand down. We got to clean up our act now. We can't be savages no more. We got to flip the script. Remember the agenda? We got to stop slobbering and salivating over the bodies. And we got to clean up the act. I can imagine how long it took for them to get through to the mob people that, hey, we got to make Louisville look better. We got to make Fulton County and Paducah. We got to make all of our counties. We got to make them look good now. because the people were so ingrained to satisfying that crave for black blood. Yeah, I know. I had no idea either. So, the 4 attorneys appointed by the court to defend the black youth, they asked to be excused. After their request was denied, one lawyer expressed his distaste for the assignment. Buckner was tried first, since the police believed that he had committed the stabbings. Although it was late in the afternoon before the jury, made up of farmers and townspeople, white farmer and townspeople, had been selected, the trial began at once and ended quickly. When the jury retired to deliberate, the mob made rumblings that suggested an attempt on Buckner's life might occur, but the threat quickly ended when the jury returned after less than 5 minutes. Baby, they came back in 4 minutes. The jury, of course, sentenced him to death. When the news was spread through the crowd, there was a mighty grunt of satisfaction. And nothing more. Nothing more. Although it was late in the afternoon before the jury had been selected, the trial began and ended at once. Recall, when they were going through the jury selection, they couldn't find nobody. They couldn't find nobody that wanted to sit on the jury, because black people at that time were noticing and were demanding that black people sat on the juries too. So even though they were making a play to look for fair people, they still ended up with all white jurors. So it took them all day to find the jurors. When they did, the trial began and it was over just like that. But when the jury retired to deliberate, the mob was rumbling under their breath. Yeah, if they come back with anything less than a death penalty, we're gonna get that nigger. We're gonna get that nigger. We're gonna get life for a life. They were mumbling and stuff. Yeah, and I want an ear. I want his nose. Give me a finger. Wife said, bring her back a pinky. All crazy shit, cannibalistic shit. So the jury already knew. They ass already knew. The only thing they had to go in there and ask each other was, do we want the mob to rise up? Or do we want to go ahead and let them have them? And they decided, hey, let them have them. So they convicted him guilty, death penalty. And when they went out and said that, the news spread through the crowd, and there was that mighty grunt of satisfaction. And nothing more. By now, darkness had come, and the court decided to postpone Smith's trial until Monday, to the obvious displeasure of many in the crowd who would be unable to attend because they had work, had to go back home, had families and stuff like that. In the second trial, the only clear point established by the prosecution was that Smith and Buckner were close friends. Although he had probably witnessed the stabbing of Roby, Smith had not, as it had been contended. He didn't assist Buckner in any manner. Nevertheless, his jury deliberated for 30 minutes before finding him guilty of voluntary manslaughter and handing down a sentence of 21 years in prison. Buckner became the first person to die in the electric chair in Eddyville. Aware of the public's continued interest in how condemned men would die, the Courier-Journal sent a reporter to give all of the details on how the execution would happen. Yeah, they love to hear about all of it. So they had to provide them with all of it. They had to satiate that thirst, that crave. So the newspaper detailed everything. All the newspapers, not just one, All of them. How do you think when one newspaper reported that a white woman was raped and such was being looked for, and there will be a lynching in 5 days, then that newspaper published that story, and the other newspapers published that story through the whole state, through the entire state. And those areas that are receiving those newspapers and following them, those areas flocked to wherever the lynching was going to be. Yeah. So, they sent the newspapers out about how graphic the lynchings were and stuff. So with the electrocution, they was like, the first shot to be administered to the victim will last 10 seconds and will consist of 1,700 volts of electricity. The second shot will be a repetition with 300 voltage added. So they're going to add 300 volts on top of that, which is 10 seconds with 300 extra volts, which is 2,000 volts of electricity. And the third and last shot will convey the full voltage power of the apparatus. So you know how when they turn the switch and they flip it halfway and then they push it all the way? Well, there you have it. The first one was the first volt of electricity. And then the next one, which is when they added 300. And then when they pushed it in, that's when it gave the full voltage. So it was already at 2,000 with that added 300. So once it hit top notch, I don't know how much the voltage is. Okay, at sunrise on July the 8th, 1911, 2 months after his conviction of murder, Buckner died. A black teenager had become the first victim of the electric chair. And as the paper pointed out, the next 2 people scheduled to die was also blacks. Indeed, of the 7 men put to death in 1911, all of them were African Americans. A similar case, in some respects to the events in Lebanon, occurred in Paducah, Kentucky several years later. Like Lebanon, Paducah had been visited by racial violence. 2 blacks had been lynched in October 1916, and whites was angry about what they perceived as the militant response by black people to the incident. Ain't that some shit? 2 black people had been lynched in October 1916, and white people was angry about what they thought was black people being militant because of the lynchings. Like black people supposed to just turn their head and, oh well, let them do what they gonna do to us. Oh well, let them do what they do to us. Just turn it from cheek to cheek. Oh well, just let them do. Oh well, just let them do. Oh well, oh shit. Don't make no sense, dude. Mims to me. While attempting to arrest several men outside of a club in the black community, policeman Will F. Romaine was shot and killed with his own gun in August 1917. After conducting a thorough search of the neighborhood and making dozens of arrests, the police named Jim Howard, a bad type of Negro, and his friend Harry Porter as their leading suspects. Reputedly, Howard had a grudge against the officer for having given him a speeding ticket in his automobile. And that was their number one jealous, to see a black man with a car, some land, cows, cattle. In hopes of avoiding further racial violence, Paducah's Black teachers, physicians, and businessmen passed a resolution to show the white community that they too stood for law and order and the punishment of criminals. Black employees of the Illinois Central Railway expressed in a resolution their regret over the officer's death, and they offered their assistance in bringing to justice the blacks responsible. Howard and Porter remained at large for almost 6 weeks before their capture on a train in Maysville in northern Kentucky. Within a week, Paducah authorities had returned the men to stand trial, refusing their request for a change of venue, despite all of the violence that had happened in the area. They knew they should have got them out of there. I mean, the trial of the two men was quick. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. Howard, accused of pulling the trigger, was given the death sentence, and Porter, his accomplice, received a life sentence. After delays for more than a year, Howard died in Eddyville on June 6, 1919, the year of Black Awakening. Yep, that was 1919, the year of Black Awakening. Very little change occurred over the next 2 decades. So that would have been 1929, 1939. Blacks on trial for the murder of white people still had to be escorted by heavily armed guardsmen. White people still flocked to see the event, and let it be known that if the jury did not have the stomach to fully punish the accused blacks, they sure did. 3 blacks was tried for murder in Elizabethtown on April 28, 1931, in a courtroom filled, as usual, with hostile white folks. They had been arrested for the murder of a white farmer during a crime spree through Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. Much of the mob's anger was directed toward one of the defendants, Walter Dewberry, because he chose C. Eubank Tucker, a black civil rights activist from Louisville, as his counsel instead of the white attorneys appointed by the court. See, they had their own attorneys to represent the black men, the black men. But Walter Dewberry, he hired his own lawyer. Yep, he hired his own lawyer. So they really was sitting there pissed at him. Because how dare you hire your own lawyer so that you could possibly escape the lynching that they all needed for their satiation. During the court's recess for lunch, Tucker was physically attacked by a group of white men. His lawyer was attacked by a group of white men during lunch. One of the assailants struck him repeatedly in the face with brass knuckles. Several guardsmen took Tucker to a doctor and then back to the courthouse, and they remained with him for the duration of the trial. Upon returning to court, Tucker filed a change of venue upon the grounds that no justice could be given in a court where the state militia was needed to guard the prisoners and where the defense attorney narrowly escaped death at the hands of an angry mob. He was the defense attorney. But defending a black man could cost him his life. The judge ignored the request and ordered the trial to continue. The all-white jury found Tucker's client guilty of murder after deliberating for 13 minutes. Charles Rogers and Walter Holmes also received the death penalty. As had become routine, appeals and delays lasted for almost a year, but eventually the 3 men died in the electric chair. Rogers and Holmes on April 29, 1932, and Dewberry died in the electric chair almost 18 months later on November 10th in 1933. Given how easily many blacks were convicted of murder and sentenced to death or to long prison terms, it is surprising to discover that on several occasions they succeeded in challenging their convictions or in having their sentences commuted by the governor. Several such cases occurred in Lexington in the first decade of the 1900s. On Sunday, November 20th, 1904, a fight occurred in a salon between a group of whites and three blacks, John Taylor, Ed Taylor, and James Garfield Smith. During the struggle, a pistol was fired 3 or 4 times, and one of the shots proved fatal to William Moore, a white man. In the chaos immediately after the shooting, most of the whites left the salon, including the man the blacks said was responsible for the incident. The police, upon arriving, arrested the 3 blacks and charged them with murder. Although tried separately, each man received a death sentence. One of the jurors in the trial of James Garfield Smith told a reporter that a verdict could have been reached without the jury leaving their seats. The attorney for John Taylor had asked the court to overturn the indictment on the ground that the jury commissioners had discriminated against Negroes in their selection of names from which the grand jury was drawn. So what they did was said that, black people names were in the selection, they just wasn't pulled. The Kentucky Court of Appeals overturned the death sentences and ordered new trials. But in doing so, the court refused comment on the failure of the judge to grant a change of venue or on the continued exclusion of Afro-Americans from the jury selection process. Instead, the justices said that errors had been made in how the men were charged. First of all, the prosecutor, unable to determine which man had allegedly fired the gun, had charged all 3 of them with murder. Then the judge, by instructing the jurors to consider whether or not the men had been involved in a conspiracy to murder William Moore, had also erred, because this instruction was an invitation to the jury to give free rein to their imagination or their suspicion. So they can come up with any kind of fallacy, any kind of lie, any scenario because of what he said, to consider whether or not the men had been involved in a conspiracy. Come up with some shit and say that they put a plan together. That's basically what he was telling them. And to convict the defendant of a conspiracy with parties whose names the grand jury did not know, and which the evidence failed to disclose to the court. Finally, the judge failed to instruct the jury that Moore might have been killed by accident. One of their guns might have killed Moore. To avoid the charge that the men could not receive a fair trial in Fayette County, the circuit court ordered that a jury be selected from Woodford County for the retrials in June 1906. Also, in an attempt to comply with the ruling of the appellate court, the prosecution charged each defendant with complicity, not conspiracy, in the death of William Moore. The all-white jury found the men guilty and sentenced them to life in prison, probably the harshest punishment the Kentucky Court of Appeals would have allowed in the case. On several occasions, Republican Governor Wilson proved sympathetic to Afro-Americans convicted in controversial cases and commuted their sentences. Whether he did so in this case is unknown, but clearly the 3 men had avoided the gallows. Another shooting occurred in a Lexington saloon just before the start of the second trial of the 3 men. The account, published in a Lexington white newspaper, said that Aaron McCabe, crazed by whiskey and bent on wreaking havoc against members of the white race, for whom he is alleged to have had an intense hatred, went into the saloon, and for no reason at all, he shot and killed the barkeeper, Martin Clark. After being arrested, however, McCabe gave a different version. Upon entering the saloon, he had ordered a drink of a good whiskey. After finishing the drink, McCabe asked how much he owed for the drink, and the bartender said 15 cents. McCabe then challenged the white man, saying that it was a whiskey of poor quality, worth no more than a dime. McCabe's bold words led to a confrontation, and the bartender warned him to pay me 15 cents or I'll kill you. And I saw him reach for his revolver. After he fired 2 shots at me, I shot at him. In the court, one of the whites testifying for the state did admit that Clark fired first and fired several additional shots before he died. He tried. He shot some more shots before he died. Nevertheless, McCabe's all-white jury quickly gave him the death sentence. The case was appealed and a new trial was ordered. Several months later, McCabe was found guilty again, but this time was given a life sentence. Like the other Lexington blacks, he too had avoided a legal execution, but his case had a tragic ending. While awaiting transfer to another state prison, McCabe, according to the version released by the police and other officials, strangled himself to death in his jail cell. No, he didn't. No, them motherfucking murderers. They strangled him. They motherfucking asses strangled him. In rural Fayette County on June 29, 1907, Robert Hocker, Hockerer, killed Newton D. Veal, Veal, a white farmer, after an argument over wages. Hocker's death penalty was upheld by the Kentucky Court of Appeals. At the last moment, with the gallows already erected and Hocker transported to Lexington for the execution, Governor Wilson commuted the sentence to life in prison. In explaining his decision, the governor expressed a strong disbelief in the story told by white people in court. Almost all of their testimony for the prosecution had been contradictory. No doubt Hocker had shot Veal to death, Wilson explained, but no motive for the shooting had been established in court. Perhaps in the final analysis, Wilson commuted the black farm laborer's death sentence because of a sincere belief that all lawyers realize that there is often a lack of the great care in the trial of Negroes, which a high-minded fulfillment of the solemn duty should secure, especially in the cases where they kill white men. So instead of saying all that right there, in other words, he was just likely to say that all lawyers realize that in the cases of a white man shooting a black man, it's mainly out of self-defense. These same years witnessed another court case involving a black farm laborer charged with the murder of a white landowner, a white landlord. But he was a landowner. Rufus Browder shot and killed James Cunningham on July 13, 1908, in Logan County, an act that led to the tragic lynching of 4 innocent black youths. In August, the grand jury indicted Browder for murder after being turned down by attorneys in Russellville and in Logan County. Browder finally secured the services of James C. Sims, a prominent lawyer from Bowling Green. Sims had been involved in controversial cases before, having served as one of the attorneys for Bob Harper, the innocent black youth charged with rape, who died at the hands of a lynch mob in Bowling Green in 1892. He was one of his attorneys. Determined to save his client's life, instead of just going through the motions, Sims argued for a change of venue, which the judge denied, and exhausted his preemptive challenges before a jury was selected. Surprisingly, the trial ended in a hung jury. 9 jurors voted for the death penalty, 2 for a life sentence, and one for 21 years in prison. Browder's second trial took place in February 1909. Logan County white people again flocked to the courtroom, but they were visibly upset that many blacks attended the trial too. This time, the jury agreed on the death sentence for Browder, setting April 16th as the date. In the eyes of the jury, the most damaging evidence against the black man was the testimony of Cunningham's widow, who stated that Browder had fired first. Russellville's correspondent for the Courier-Journal said that Browder had received a fair trial at the hands of the all-white jury. Comment is universal here upon the dignity, quietness, and deliberation that marked the trial. In finding Browder guilty, the jury had demonstrated no racial prejudices. There was a saneness, calmness pervading the trial that the law-abiding element here point to as indicating a better future in the criminal element of Logan County. Irene Cunningham's statement that she saw Browder shoot her husband is highly questionable. A coroner's inquest was held at the Cunningham home immediately after the shooting. Justice of the Peace J.W. Riley, a neighbor of Cunningham's, presided over the hearing and took extensive notes on the testimony of the widow. Upon the conclusion of the inquest, Riley returned home, recopied his notes, and mailed a formal report of the incident to the office of the circuit court clerk. In this report, Riley quoted Irene Cunningham as saying that she did not witness the beginning of the trouble between her husband and Browder, that she arrived at the door only after the first shot had been fired. Yet at the trial, the following exchange took place between Attorney Sims and Mrs. Cunningham. Question: did you or did you not, in your testimony at that time before the coroner's jury, make a statement in substance or form of words that you did not see the beginning of the trouble, knew that James Cunningham had gone to the buggy house to put the buggy in it, heard a pistol fire, run to the door, saw Jim Cunningham fall to his knees and throw one hand to his breast, saw him pull a pistol from his pocket while on his knees and fire at Rufus. Rufus run off by the time I got there, and John Cunningham had fallen on face. I saw that he was dying and run back to the telephone and called for the doctor and thought I heard 4 shots fired. And she said, I did not. And the question said, he said, question, didn't make that either in form of words or substance? And she said, I did not. Later in the trial, attorney John B. Rhodes, R-O-D-S, who assisted Sims in the defense of Browder, questioned Riley about Mrs. Cunningham's statement during the inquest. I would get you to state the question. I would get you to state whether or not she said on that occasion, at that coroner's inquest, in substance, that she did not see the beginning of the trouble, knew that Jazz Cunningham had gone to the buggy house to put the buggy in it, heard a pistol fire, and ran to the door? In the question, the answer, that is my best recollection now. When ruling on Browder's case, the Kentucky Court of Appeals first addressed the question of the lower court's refusal of the defense request for a change of venue. Under Kentucky law, the court declared, when it appears that the defendant cannot have a fair trial in the county where the prosecution is pending, the judge shall order the trial to be held in the most convenient county in which a fair trial can be had. The motion for a change of venue had been filed on August the 1st, the day after the 4 men had been killed. What more did they need? And after whites had threatened violence on the entire black community of Russellville. What more did you need? Furthermore, the court noted with dismay, at the start of Browder's trial, the 2 men who had signed the affidavits for moving the trial had been told by the mob, we will get you next. Yeah. So even the men who signed the affidavits to change for the change of venue. Yeah, they threatened them too. We'll get you next. The justices pointed out. Hold on. Let me see. Can I move elsewhere to finish this chapter right here? Let's see. Well, if I do, we're going to run out of battery really, really fast. Let's see here. We're going to try, okay? Just hold on. Hold on. I don't need you seeing everything. All right, yeah. That'll work. Let me find the charger. Oh, I need a All right, let's finish our reading here. Okay. Yeah, I cut the internet off. I was trying to grab a charger. So even after the four innocent men, young boys, had been killed, they still would not give them a change of venue. They still would not give them a change of venue. I want to get back exactly to that part there. Okay, here it is. Oh, because whites had threatened violence on the entire black community of Russellville. Furthermore, the court noted with dismay at the start of Browder's trial, the two men who had signed the affidavits for moving the trial had been told by the mob, "We will get you next." The justices pointed out that the existence of racial prejudice led to the indictment and conviction of Browder. Members of the Kentucky Court of Appeals failed to comment on or acknowledge the pervasiveness of racial discrimination in the state. But in a most significant statement in the Browder decision, one that clearly applies to numerous other convictions of Afro-Americans, the court clearly discussed the issue. And this is what they said. If the defendant had Negro, or if he were a white man and had killed a white man, we might look at the but we cannot shut our eyes to the fact that here was a case of race prejudice excited to the white heat. A prominent white man had been shot by a Negro laborer working for him. The mob wished to execute the Negro summarily the night he was placed in jail. Being balked in that attempt, they wreaked their vengeance on 4 innocent Negroes, whose only offense was that they was his friends. So they wanted to get him that night, but they couldn't get him that night. So they got 4 innocent boys that was his friends. To say the defendant could have a fair trial in Russellville under such circumstances is to shut our eyes to the conditions which must have prevailed when such things as we have detailed took place. The justices firmly believed that Browder could not receive a fair trial in Russellville. They pointed out that all of the members of the local bar, fearing the wrath of their fellow citizens, had staunchly refused to take part in the defense of a black man. An indication that racial prejudice existed was the total rejection by the judge and the prosecutor of the defendant's plea that he shot in self-defense. They ignored his life as an exemplary citizen with no criminal record. The court ended with a telling point. When the public mind is excited by race hostility, the feeling may smolder, but though not apparent on the surface, it does not soon die out. On the contrary, often the sentiment spreads and strengthens. In other words, white America holds a grudge. Rufus Browder was tried once again, this time in Franklin, Simpson County. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Browder arrived in the state prison in July 1910. Almost immediately, a number of black citizens from Logan County sent petitions to Wilson, urging him to release Browder from prison, hoping that the bitter feelings generated by Cunningham's death and the lynchings of the four youths would ease in time. Wilson refused to make any ruling on Browder's case for a year. In the fall of 1911, however, he informed the residents of Logan County of his intention to review Browder's conviction. Numerous letters, both for and against pardoning Browder, were sent to the governor. Many whites, referring to themselves as leading citizens, called for the release of Browder. Although a thorough review of the case, Governor Wilson informed Sims, a man he greatly respected, of his dilemma. I'm not able to reach a conclusion to the exclusion of a doubt that the verdict and judgment in Rufus Browder's case is wrong. Sims responded immediately. This being true, ought you not resolve that doubt in behalf of Browder, which seems to be the rule in all criminal proceedings? Can you not see your way clear to commute his sentence from life to 10 years, which would be ample punishment, even if the record shows that he is guilty of voluntary manslaughter? Wilson agreed, and 2 days later he informed the public of his decision to commute the sentence to a sentence of 10 years in the penitentiary, with the usual allowance for good time. Ultimately, Rufus Browder, who was 21 years old when he arrested for killing James Cunningham, was never released from prison. In a letter written more than 3 decades after the governor reduced the sentence from life to 10 years, Attorney Rhodes explained that Browder had died of unknown causes during his 7th year of incarceration. In view of the many legal lynchings that occurred in the Bluegrass State, Browder's being sent to prison was a victory of sorts. Yet after the strong statements made by the justices of the Kentucky Court of Appeals, it must have been surprising to him and his attorneys that he was made to stand trial again. The court had clearly said that Browder had not received a fair trial and had left the implication that it would be difficult for any black charged with such an offense to have a fair trial from an all-white jury. To be sure, Governor Wilson reduced the sentence, but this seemed like a token gesture when considering the clear fact that Browder had defended himself. It was self-defense. That he died without ever regaining his freedom concluded the tragedy. Indeed, being in jail might have hastened his demise. As mentioned previously, in 1908, the very same year that Browder killed Cunningham, a shootout in Dixon resulted in the death of one white and the arrest of 11 blacks. The men were charged in the usual court setting that included whites demanding justice. With the prosecution unable to determine who had fired the fatal shots, the jury gave each defendant a light sentence of 7 years in prison for participating in the race riot. On November 23, 1910, after the 11 men had spent almost a year and a half in jail, Governor Wilson acted favorably on their petitions for pardons and released the men from prison. It is a sorrow to every man who honors and loves Kentucky that such a story as this could be true. That Jacob McDowell, the father of one of the men sent to prison, was lynched after his son and the other black men had been arrested, proved, in the eyes of the governor, that the men were justified in making plans to guard the jailhouse. Contrary to the accounts published in white newspapers, Wilson explained, the white man killed and the one seriously injured were not just traveling along, but were members of the lynch mob, making them guilty of a felony when they were shot. No person in this mob is entitled to any sympathy or consideration. On the contrary, every person in it was guilty of a felony and ought to be in the penitentiary. Instead, the honest, hard-working black men who had gone to Dixon on a call of humanity were indicted and sent to the penitentiary. When considering that the men were tried in a hostile environment, the light sentence, the governor noted, indicated that the men were innocent. If they had been guilty as charged, the verdict would have been death or imprisonment for life. Wilson commented on the number of blacks who have been sentenced to prison by all-white juries for doing nothing more than protecting themselves and their families from white aggression. At one point, he said, all men of ordinary sense know that Negroes do not band together in such a county as this to mob white men. Black people don't have a history of violence against white America. Black people don't have a history of violence against white America. White America got a history of violence, lynching, torture, skinning, dismemberment against Black America. Black America might have a history of violence against Black America. These 5 cases, from the murder trial of the 3 Lexington blacks in 1905 through that of the Webster County blacks for rioting, resulted in total or partial court victories for Afro-Americans accused of killing whites. Clearly, the actions of Governor Wilson challenging the verdicts of all white juries had been influential. The Kentucky Court of Appeals had also played a significant role overturning death sentences and ordering trials moved from the communities where the shootings had occurred. Yet Kentucky blacks still had reason to be concerned that the legal system discriminated against them. For these same years, as well as the next 2 decades, witnessed a succession of Afro-Americans found guilty by all white juries in front of hostile white mobs. Also, a great majority of blacks on trial in small towns experienced quick trials in which they were denied the opportunity to confer with counsel or to locate potential defense witnesses. 2 significant cases, the first in 1918 and the other 2 decades later, challenged the practice of having speedy trials for blacks and the continued exclusion of blacks from the juries. Although ignoring the issue when reviewing the numerous convictions of blacks in the past, the justices of the Kentucky Court of Appeals, in the case of a black teenager, finally addressed the repeated instances of hasty trials for Afro-Americans. On April 22, 1918, Bradley McDaniel shot and killed D. Spears in the small community of Smith's Grove in Warren County. Local authorities carried the youth to Louisville for safekeeping after a mob attempted, without success, to spring him from the jail. They would try again. One member of the mob candidly told law officers, because Mrs. Spears had pleaded with them to bring that Negro back. Bring that Negro back with you and hang him in front of my window so that I can witness his death. And that's what the mob told the sheriffs, that the law officers, that they were doing it for. Because the widow told them to bring that Negro back with you and hang him in front of my window so I can see his death. On Sunday night, May the 12th, the black youth was taken to Bowling Green, Kentucky to stand trial. Believing as usual that a black shooting a white was an open and shut case, officials had McDaniel indicted by the grand jury, put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death all on a Tuesday. The Kentucky Court of Appeals issued a detailed opinion of the case on October 29, 1918. Without a doubt, the justices explained McDaniel had shot the white man, but the evidence was not clear about whether or not D. Spears was charging McDaniel with a large piece of lumber when he was shot and killed. Regardless, they noted, we have reached the conclusion that the judgment appealed from should be reversed and the defendant granted a new trial, and this upon the sole ground that his motion for a continuance should have been sustained. Clearly, the lower court had erred. The justices called it a prejudicial error when compelling the black youth to go on trial the very same day that the murder indictment had been returned. The Court of Appeals next condemned the whites of Warren County for the procedures involved in the trial of McDaniel. In the eyes of the justices, the mob, not the authorities, had controlled events in Bowling Green. That the black youth received the death sentence was no surprise. The mob had presented a petition to the county attorney, demanding that the defendant be placed upon trial immediately at a special term of the court, and unless he was given the death penalty, they would take the law into their own hands and see that he was executed. So the authorities figured, we either give him to them or they finna come and take him and destroy the building, destroy and vandalize anyway. The justice agreed with the defense attorney's contention that at the start of the trial, the courtroom was crowded with mob members who had attempted to lynch McDaniel, and that at least 6 of those men were placed on the jury. The defense counsel had an important responsibility when his client faces the death penalty, the court explains. Therefore, regardless of how brilliant or experienced an attorney might be, he needs sufficient time to prepare an adequate defense. Towards the end of their trials should be held without necessary delays. Toward the end of their ruling, the justices emphasized that for the sake of public confidence, trials should be held without unnecessary delays. They stressed this point, however, notwithstanding the clamor for speedy trials, we believe that trials may be too speedy and thus do more harm than good to the body politic by lessening in place of increasing respect for the law. The outcome of McDaniel's new trial resulted in another guilty verdict and a death sentence. Although a final ruling on the case is unknown, the black youth avoided death in Kentucky's electric chair. In all likelihood, the government commuted the sentence to life in prison. Even this, of course, can be viewed as a form of legal lynching, considering that the killing of D. Spears was probably done in self-defense. And yeah, I think we got 6% of battery left. So, yeah, peace and power to the people. And I say we have 10 pages left. Did you hear it? Yep. Yep. We have, oh, wow. Yeah, we got maybe 6 pages left. Well, they double-sided, so yeah, 12. Peace and power to the people. Love your ancestors. They loved you first.